Thank you to you all for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation because authenticity is definitely something that's become a buzzword, but when done well, really does make a huge difference. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about the power of genuine storytelling and also what transparent communication does in terms of driving purpose-driven community engagement. So I am Angelina Darrisaw, founder and CEO of C-Suite Coach, and this topic and theme is important to me for a number of reasons. Firstly, when we look at from the internal standpoint, which we'll have Alex weigh in on a lot, authenticity from a company plays a huge role in how community members see their company, how they're able to be retained and engaged by their company. And then when we look at communities externally, which we'll have Lucy and Zuri weigh in on, an authentic approach makes a huge difference in driving impact and building relationships with communities. So I want to tell you a little bit about our panelists. We have with us today, I'll start with Lucy Pinto, who is a senior marketing manager of Grow with Google and has been there for 10 plus years, working to level the playing field for communities that face barriers to technology and economic opportunity. She leads skilling initiatives for small businesses, including the Grow with Google Digital Coaches Program, which C-Suite Coach has had the tremendous opportunity and privilege of being a partner for, that has touched 60,000 business owners a year. How many total?
235,000 to date.
235,000. And so you can definitely speak to authenticity. But I do want to also add that she's managed the participation of hundreds of employees and volunteer initiatives, really focused on bridging the digital divide across 15 countries. And that includes South Africa, Colombia, Brazil, and Nigeria. And those efforts have also reached 135,000 people. Welcome, Lucy.
Thank you.
And I won't stop there. We have more amazing panelists with us. Zuri Godfrey is a brand marketing manager at Google, leading creator advocacy and ads marketing. He's a former Division I athlete at Howard University, where he played varsity football, and he's been at places like ESPN, brand strategy within Google, PwC. His purpose is to serve, speak, and succeed, and he's passionate about sponsorship, sports, and social. Moreover, his mission is to use his blessing to be a blessing while living out his mantra of faith, family, and fitness on a daily basis. Welcome, Zuri.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have with us Alex Cuevas, who's a people champion, passionate about the entire employee experience and ensuring the road of talent within the advertising industry is equitable and inclusive at all levels. She currently serves as the Senior Vice President and Director of Talent at BBDO North America, leading recruitment and retention efforts for the world's most awarded advertising agency. Her focus and partnership with C-suite stakeholders is continuing to bring the best and brightest executives and creatives to the network while keeping diversity at the forefront. Thank you, Alex, for being with us. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so I want to dive in because, again, we're in a world right now that's overflowing with content. So I first want to just talk about from the marketing side, what are some of the most effective strategies for brands to capture and hold the attention of communities, but also where they don't look at it as noise, but really as something that they want to participate in? So we'll start with Lucy.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on when it comes to content, right? A lot of competing platforms, a lot of just even influencers, content creators. And I think one of the recent things that even I'm trying to do in my own work that I have found very meaningful is getting proximate to your audience. I think in marketing, especially when you are working with agencies on the corporate side, you rely on your agency to do a lot of the work, to do a lot of, the customization, to do a lot of the research. But being in those rooms yourself will give you insight that even sometimes your agency can't, because it's not tangible. You can see it in a report, you can see it in an email, but being in the room And understanding your direct consumer is really, really important. And as you know, one of the things that we do through some of our programs is work directly with small businesses, be in the room. What are their challenges? What are their pain points? And not doing that, once a quarter, but trying to be intentional at doing it very frequently, whether it's every 2 weeks, once a month, if you have the time. But I find that the more power that you have in decision making, the more important it is for you to get proximate, particularly right now, so you can understand what it is that your end user needs and be able to then craft a strategy in partnership with your agency that's in alignment for your end user. So I would say getting proximate, I think, is one of the strategies that I've seen, particularly if you're in a decision-making role, not fully yet trusting your agencies, but being in the room with them and talking to your end user.
Extremely powerful. Thank you, Lucy.
That's a tough act to follow, Lucy. I would say for me, it definitely starts with the cultural insight. A lot of times companies look at their objectives and see how they can move their business forward, when obviously you have to do that to reach your bottom line. But what I felt has been more impactful, and it actually even still achieves the business objective, is when you look at the user first, when you look at the consumer, whatever specific target audience that you're trying to reach, and see what they are doing. See from a social listening perspective what's going on in the culture of the target audience that you have. And so a way that you can genuinely show up and authentically show up is by seeing the cultural insight and starting your marketing campaign and everything you do after that to follow that from the cultural insight. So that's what I would say.
I actually would say I agree, but it starts with the people on my end. Who do you put on the team? Who do you have working on it? And the specific mix of people, in that not everyone needs to be of the demographic that you're targeting, right? But they need to be open-minded enough to want to dive into the cultural insights and participate and bring their full selves in order to make it authentic. At the end of the day, we're all consumers as well. But I think it's critical to have representation, right? And to have a good mix when it comes to the team.
Thank you. So much there. And I want to start now with you, Alex. When we think about storytelling, it can be harnessed really not only to just engage an audience, but also to build that authentic connection between an organization and the community that is a part of that organization. How have you seen that play out in your work?
I think it starts with the people understanding the mission of the brand and the mission of their agency. So I'll give an example. GE has been our client for over 100 years, since 1920. We understand GE just broke up into 3 different brands, right? Medical technology, energy, and aviation. It seems as though so many people understood it so clearly. The message was delivered very well. Why is that? I think it's because GE knows its mission and where it's going, but our team and our employees also know, one, we're the most awarded agency in the world. If you're at BBDO, it's because you value creativity, right? So you're there to make the best for your client, regardless of it is. And 2, what's our mission at the end of this? It's to make sure that everyone knows that GE is not just GE now, right? It's 3 brands. So I think it really starts with transparency and having people understand their purpose and why they're really doing the work, right? Because sometimes it can be that you're in the planning department getting the cultural insight and you're very clear on what the brief is, but then that translates differently throughout the creative process and people kind of forget, oh, what are we doing here, right? Yeah. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. And when we think about storytelling, something we hear a lot about is transparency and communication. It's often praised, but brands aren't always doing the steps that they need to take. So what would you look at are some of the specific steps that brands need to take to be transparent in communications with communities? When a big brand steps into a community, how do you build that trust? What does that really look like?
Yeah, I can touch on this. For me, what it looks like from a brand perspective is showing and not telling. And I start there because when you think about transparency, if someone is talking to you, talking at you, it could seem salesy. But if someone is actually building a product with you or building a marketing campaign with you, you all are locking arms, you have them in your focus groups, so on and so forth. It's more meaningful. They feel felt. And so outside of that, I think also at the art, there's an art and a science to storytelling. And so within the art side of it, you have to make sure that you have the people in your team that you are also trying to attract and that are showing up in the marketing. And then from a science perspective, the analytics is key. And transparency, the last point on this, but transparency, it's actually including disclaimers in your work. It's also including what it is that you may have went through to get to the point that you're trying to get to. And what I mean by that is, like, there's a lot of internal work that needs to be done and a lot of accountability that needs to be held to say that, oh, we tried this and this didn't work. We tried this worked, and this is how we got from A to Z.
I would add, just when I think about community and leading with community first, I know I've already said this and I can't emphasize it enough, but it's listening to your end users. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth. It's like we should be, especially in the creative space, listening more than we're actually, speaking. And I think if your work is to be out in the community and be perceived as someone, as a brand that puts community first, then you have to be out in the community. I also kind of time back to people because for a portion of my career, I was in HR. You have to put money where your mouth is, right? If you are going out and you're trying from like a marketing perspective, trying to resonate with Black and brown communities, for example, well, what are you doing internally to also do that? And what are you doing to boost your own brand internally for that crowd? Because I think it's all an ecosystem play. So the internal will lead to the external, and it will be, a cycle of that. And so community isn't just external. A lot of those insights you can get internal from internal employees or, those diverse perspectives that you have at your company. And so I think it's really a bridge of the two. And so when I think about community, I think about the internal team and then also the external component of listening. And then that's when I aggregate the data. And that's when, as a team, we're able to really, I think, have a strategy where you're actually paying attention to what people are saying, what the trends are showing, but it's diverse because you're really being intentional from the inside out. So I think it starts inside.
I would love if you could weigh in a little bit more on that, Alex. I'd love to hear your take also on what are some of the specific things internally you're doing to create that transparency that helps employees feel that they can authentically connect with audiences.
I think it starts with them feeling like they can bring their full selves to work. And I hate saying that because so many people use that phrase and it's like, what does it really mean, right? There has to be a little bit of a separation. But what I mean by that is being safe enough to express your opinion in a meeting and not being shut down, right? And so we say at our agency, there's no such thing as a bad meeting. We don't have to be that safe. And why? We have the luxury of having relationships with our clients for so long that there's just trust in the room. But I think also it's supporting our employees with things like employee resource groups so that then they do feel safe, right? And if it's not within our agency, within our holding company, it's establishing events for our different departments. For example, our creatives have numerous happy hours. Why? Because not everyone works on the same team, and you have to kind of mix and mingle. It's supporting each other. For example, we have a lot of creatives that are in theater or comedians, and it's going out there and showing up for people. And I think Lucy, you're right. It starts internal for it to be authentic, and then you can go. It shows up in the work.
I think you had this, Angelina, as a question. It was like, can you provide like an example? And I had to think back. It's an oldie but goodie, and it resonates with me because I actually like to do a lot of outdoor stuff. But REI a few years ago started their campaign Opt Outside for Black Friday, and so they closed their stores. They close their stores on like the busiest day, one of the busiest days for retail. They don't take any, payments online. And so that was because as a brand, they were aligning with their mission. But one of the things that they really did that I found was probably the most meaningful was they paid all of their employees for that day. And they said, we're all going to opt outside. So we're going to close down our shop, but we're going to make sure our employees are well taken care of and also encourage them and build that internal advocacy because it starts from within. And so the case study really is around the power of internal and employee advocacy, even in your external campaigns. And I thought that was one example of like a brand doing it right. And from the outside looking in as the consumer who does enjoy the outside, I don't have a lot of REI stuff, but, I was actually really proud and I was more prone to then explore the brand and get some of their stuff. So they really captured my attention as a consumer. But that was the piece that got to me, the fact that they really took care of their employees first. And it starts at home.
Yeah, and I have another example that similar to that, building off of that, it hits very home for me. One of the things that I really love about the org that I'm in within Google, which is ads marketing, is our vice president, who isn't necessarily a minority from the standpoint of Black or Latinx, but she actually makes it a point, whether it's monthly or quarterly, to have what she calls an AC in her advisory council, where she'll bring in people from all levels that are Black and brown, and we are able to have candid conversations about what's going on internally within the work that we're doing, within our lives, so on and so forth. And kind of back to your point on trust, we are able to build trust and furthermore psychological safety, which is the willingness to take risk and be vulnerable because of that form. So as we all have been saying, it starts from the inside and in return outside. The external marketing, storytelling, community building will look authentic once it's done and the trust has been built internally.
Yeah, these are great examples and I'm excited. I always love those real-time examples of things that we're seeing brands do really well, because often when we're hearing about brands, it's where they're not getting it right. So thank you for sharing that. Now, one of the things that is a big challenge, though, and always very meaningful when we think about this theme of authenticity is how do we measure the ROI? How do we make sure that we're actually having success and impact with our efforts in being authentic? What does that look like? So I would love if you all could speak to what are your KPIs? What are your measurements? And also, what have been some of the wins when whether it's qualitative feedback or other things that you're seeing from the communities you're working with?
On my end, on the people side, I measured my KPI as retention, right? Not just within the organization, but specifically within the teams that you're on. If I have to rotate 5 people a month off of a client, then there's something that's off, right? So that's how I measure it. Obviously, so much goes into it in that sometimes you just can't retain an employee because they want to have a completely different career and experience. But for my end, as I mentioned, it's who is staying within the organization, who is leaving, and who is moving and asking to be moved off of teams.
Yeah. I can go next. So, Angelina, you're a partner. You know what the KPIs are, but I think like top funnel, right? So the program that I help drive in partnership with C-Suite is focused on skilling for small businesses. And so you have top of funnel like metrics. So of course, from a social aspect, like impressions, how many people are we training? I mentioned the stat earlier, it's over 230,000 small businesses across the United States, predominantly from underrepresented communities. That's really big. What does that mean? What does that really mean? And so, a number of workshops, number of trainings, all of that is great. But if it doesn't actually generate what our goal is, which is economic impact, then we're not doing our job. And so what is really, really important for me, not just as a marketer, as a program manager and all of the above of like helping lead this work forward, is the stories that are coming out of it. is our training, is our marketing, it's an input to something else. What is the output? The output is economic opportunity. How are we helping small businesses grow? How is someone who's learning to use ads, right, scaling and evolving and really growing their business? One story that I remember very vividly from a woman in Ohio, Pat's Granola. She was selling her granola to like mom and pop shops in Ohio. And when the pandemic hit, those retail stores closed. And she was like, oh, what am I going to do? And she actually met with our digital coach, Lindsay, in Ohio. And she started developing an e-commerce strategy, and she started selling her granola online. It became such a hit that she started exporting her granola to Japan and other countries from Ohio, using digital marketing tools that were taught by digital coaches. And so, when I think about that, oh, and by the way, Pat became so successful. Then she pivoted, talking about pivots, and she exited her business, and now she's consulting other small businesses. And so, and she's like, it was too demanding. Like, I'm out of the game, but I still want to focus on how I can use my learnings to help other small businesses grow. So when I think about that as an economic opportunity story, that is the impact that I want to see. And those are the stories that I want to tell. So yes, while the numbers are shiny and while you do have KPIs at a high level, it really gets down to what does that mean? What are the outcomes that you're producing for the communities that you are trying to reach? And so going back to the community, because I know that's what we're talking about, and authenticity, telling those stories and closing the loop with the community, I think is also important. If you're going to drive initiatives, marketing that is for the community, you also have to close the loop on what is that doing for the community and how is that moving the needle forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, what I love about the story is that it's long-term impact. It's not just for the moment, or this is in style, fashion, so-and-so's president, or this moment just happened. It's long-term.
Yeah.
I agree. For me, in my role in creator advocacy within ads marketing, it's all focused on shifting perception. So you brought up the marketing funnel. It's very much for us, top of funnel, shifting perception, shifting minds about ads, because from a user perspective, ads inherently get a bad rap and therefore negative connotations. And so a way for us to humanize ads and also talk about another buzzword in the sense that you said, economic impact, is how your favorite YouTuber, your favorite creator relies on digital ads. And so we do that through a flywheel that we have, and specifically to the points of KPIs. One is how many creators we recruit into our database. And from that, building authentic relationships with them, meeting with them where they're at. For example, going to VidCon to get back from Ken to meet creators where they're at. We're going to have a dinner. We're going to talk to them about what we have planned in store with them, but more importantly, how we want to hear from them as far as what they're dealing with and how we can help them grow on and off of our platform. So KPI one is for us and my team is how many creators do we have in our database? And then the second part of the advocacy flywheel is activate. So getting creators out there as advocates and ambassadors for us, sharing their stories. And then we do so by allowing them to talk about their journeys and how we have helped them throughout their journey achieve the wealth, the knowledge, success that they have. And so from that perspective, it's the KPI there is how many stories are we collecting. And then lastly, in the advocacy flywheel is amplify. And so that's all about getting the content, packaging it up, and getting it to shooting it and marketing it to the masses and also to our target audience, of course. So that's reach. How many people are we reaching? And the through line of that, and above all else, we want to make sure that we are educating and empowering creators on and off our platform. So, yeah.
These are great, great, great metrics and an amazing way to look at the work that you're doing. So I appreciate you all sharing that. One other thing, a layer I want to add on to Pat's granola story is something else that made this experience so unique is digital skills can be so intimidating. And when you have someone that is from the community that is using it with their own businesses, as Lindsay does, it really does become more inviting when it feels really inaccessible. And that's something I think Digital Coaches has done an exceptional job at. And then to Alex's point, you mentioned it was the long term. And so that's what I want to ask you all about next, because a lot of times what can build mistrust in communities is feeling like it's going to be a one and done. So how do brands demonstrate, maybe with a new initiative that you're just getting started, that this is going to be a longer term play? Or if it's a more seasoned initiative, how do you demonstrate that that commitment is going to remain?
I could start because for me, it's actually what we're going through right now. So I started this role, for context, about a year ago, and we've done some things. We actually teamed up on CultureCon, and that was sort of the coming out party, for lack of better terms, from our role. But it's all about the relationship building, and it's about explaining to them what they're going to get, the value add for them, and then committing to that. And Gen Z terminology, standing on business. And so setting the expectations and making sure you're exceeding the expectation, in my case, for creators. And so it's, for example, I touched on CultureCon. We had invited a creator to CultureCon, not to necessarily speak on a panel. I was in conversation with other few creators on the panel, but we invited her because it genuinely just wanted her to experience the conference. She was based in New York, where CultureCon is, and she didn't have any speaking engagements with us. But we wanted to just extend her the invite because she never went. And from that, we built that relationship there. And then we actually did have her speak at a panel at a later activation. And so for me, it goes back to relationship building, fostering a connection, and putting that, in my case, creators on with different opportunities that they may not have.
Thank you. Go next. I want to touch on something that I think we briefly touched on, but you mentioned transparency and communications before, and now I'm thinking of it in this particular lens for longevity. I think, we've also partnered for a few years now, and I think having a level of transparency with your stakeholders, with your partners, on what that community strategy is going to look like, and with the community itself. I think it's important in a very, meaningful way, but demonstrating, your commitment over time. And I think showing what it is that you are doing, going back to demonstrating what it is that you're actually doing, what is the output to that input, and telling that story. I think, a lot of talk around storytelling at this conference, right? And the power of storytelling. But I think oftentimes we tell the story, and even the story can feel like a one-off. And so I think how do you get into a cadence of continued storytelling and demonstrating the impact for the community, but also going back to the community and telling new stories, right? Telling new stories with a different angle, telling new stories. And I think overall, internally too, and I'd be curious to get Alex's perspective on this, is having or building that confidence, the courage, or the team, the infrastructure to be able to go into those meetings and say, okay, yes, budgets are being cut, but this is really important because this is the value that it's bringing, right? A lot of folks don't know that a lot of the work that I do, policy team, is what are you doing over there, Lucy? Can we borrow it because we need to display this work in front of, very important people on the policy side? I'm okay, it is driving bottom line impact for the company outside of the stories that we're telling. But I think when you're in the room and you're talking about how do you sustain this work over time, it's also positioning internally and being able to raise up your voice internally to have the continued investment in those community strategies, community efforts. Not easy. I think easier said than done. So I'm curious to hear from Alex actually how that's worked and how she's seeing it in her world.
I think for us, it has a lot to do with the answering the why. Why are we doing this, right? And being transparent with the teams and the employees. Why are we targeting first responders? Well, it's because AT&T has a history of doing XYZ. Why are we partnering with Sandy Hook Promise, right, to stop gun violence in schools? Is it because we want to get awards, or is it because we actually believe in it, right? And some people don't, but just understanding why you're doing it.
Yeah. That's powerful and really does make a difference, because I think that's a quick path to losing trust in a community, is not having that transparency, or communities not understanding why the work is present. And so I love the commitment to telling the story of why you're doing the work. Now, when we hear about these themes, though, it all sounds, you all are sharing great things, and it sounds, well, everyone should just be doing this. Why isn't everyone doing this? And there definitely are some obstacles and risk in trying to approach authenticity. So I would love to hear some of the risk you've encountered, or even obstacles that you've seen in this journey of trying to engage communities in ways that you think are authentic.
For my role, since it's advocacy, it's a touchy a balance. And when I say balance, for some efforts, because if it's true advocacy and we're having creators speak up on our behalf, we actually can't pay them. So one of the internal struggles that I have, for some activations, to be clear, we can pay them and we have paid them, but for some we can't. And so for the ones that we can't, like I do struggle with that, and that's an obstacle. But how I tend to overcome that obstacle actually goes back to the example that I gave with the creator that came to CultureCon. She also submitted a video to be an advocate for us about our program that we have, which is My It's My Business. And while she did that for free, we, not even in exchange, but beyond that, we invited her to CultureCon, as mentioned, and then we had her moderate a panel, actually, and that panel we paid her for. And so, yeah, the struggle in my role hits home as far as not being able to compensate every creator for every project that they do with us, but I make it a commitment to pay them when I can, or when we can, because I'm not paying them. I don't have that type of money. But yeah, so that's how it's showing up for me.
There's been a few.
She's like, which one do you want?
Oh, like, there's been quite a few. It's interesting because coming from like the HR world, where we were driving a lot of community facing programs, marketing, brand and reputation programs in HR, it's just, budgets were limited. And then transitioning all of that into marketing, you have like, yes, bigger budgets, but they're like, you're doing what? Like, what are you doing? Looking at, with things under a microscope. And I don't think that's just, internal to Google, like marketing. I think it's just marketing in general. And so I think for me, not being a marketer by trade has been, or used to be, a challenge. Trying to understand even like marketing KPIs, all of that, so that I could then position the community work. And I think now some of the challenges that I'm noticing is because the work has done so well, now there's so many people that want a piece of the work to leverage it for whether it's advocacy or something else. And so, sometimes there are a lot of ideas that maybe water down the mission or the purpose of the program or of the initiatives. And I think the challenge, nowadays for a lot of marketers or program managers who are driving this work is, how do you balance being flexible and having or setting up a flexible structure while not sacrificing that fundamental mission and purpose of the work, right? Being flexible, continuing to grow, continuing to iterate, and have a growth mindset, but not at the expense of losing what you set the community program for at the very beginning. And so I think that continues to be a challenge. I think though, like, this past year, and obviously like working with a lot of colleagues who are sharing some of those same struggles. I think going back to like the why has been very important. And showing how this is actually like a lot of what we're doing in these community programs and in our community outreach. It's really like the blueprint for scale and scaling across different communities, right? I am a firm believer that, because a lot of the work that we've done in partnership, Angelina, with C-Suite has actually started with the community first. Yes. You're actually more able to scale it into a mainstream way because it's already rooted in, DEI values, community values. And so it can easily transcend to other places. And I find myself now, speaking about that more internally and why we're able to scale so easily and why we're able to deliver. But I think just given the nature of what's happening even outside and, regulatory forces, we're forced to have those conversations now. And I think framing is really important internally.
That is powerful. Thank you for that, Lucy.
On my end, I think obstacles, it's evident and clear when there's not a healthy client relationship because the work just doesn't come out that well, right? When you have a client telling you exactly what to do or beating down our teams and creatives, like, nope, still didn't get it right. We put that work out in the world, but usually it's not the best, So I think it comes back to what I mentioned in the beginning. It's trust. Are you trusting us? Are you trusting us to do the work? Do you trust us? If not, perhaps go to another agency, right? Or, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do want to open it up for questions. I think you all shared so much that gave us food for thought and inspired a lot. So I want to give an opportunity to see if there's any questions from the audience. Great job on the conversation. There's been a lot of backlash, as you know, in the corporate workspace when it comes to the work that we do and our communities in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. How have each of you, or perhaps one of you, share a story on how you're leveraging your own experience, your own community to make sure that your very large organizations still respect what's happening in the community and understand the importance of the focus on Black and Brown stories without watering them down like society wants us to do?
For me, outside of doing creator advocacy or just outside of me as a corporate employee, I'm also a creator, mainly on LinkedIn. I was in one of their creator accelerator programs. And so for me, my work that I do internally, I already touch it externally. So I bring my full lived experience as a content creator on multiple platforms into my work. So, and even going deeper into that, I know exactly where the Black and Brown creators are. So I make sure that we are very intentional in our strategy, the strategy that I'm setting to meet them, like I said before, where they are. And so a prime example of that is Rec Philly. And Rec Philly, for those who don't know, is a great, great brand that has a physical space in Philadelphia where creators can come make and create content. And I love the premise because if you're from Philly, you don't have to go to New York to make it as a creator. And so we really wanted to pour into them and invest in them. So we sponsored their Creator Day. And we had over 500 creators of color come out. And we also brought in some top talent, local podcasts to Philadelphia, $1 million worth of game, Wallow and Gilly. And we were in conversation with them, closed doors. And to the point about authenticity, we knew that was one where we didn't want to record, where we didn't want to make it about Google and what we're doing for Wallow and Gilly. We wanted to make it about Wallow and Gilly and what they've done for us as a platform, YouTube, but more so their community who was in the audience. And so that's an example. And to tie the loop, it is very important I don't take off my LinkedIn creator hat when I step into the Google office and put on my creator advocacy hat. So,
yeah. For us, when it comes to the work, two sides to this, the work and then the people. I think it's not just reading reports and the quantitative, it's the qualitative. It's those stories. An example is there was an agency, it wasn't ours, who one of their creatives was transgender. They were working on MasterCard, and they just couldn't crack the brief. But this person, through their experience, through their story, right, not the numbers and the data that the planning team had, said, it's really hard for me to use a credit card. They say the name that's there is not the name that I use. And so they developed that campaign and changed the pronouns added pronouns to the MasterCard, right? And so it's sometimes about those deep stories, right? Versus just looking at the numbers. Then when it comes to retaining our team, right? It's the stories. And I use myself as an example often, right? When we look at who's leaving the organization, but who's staying, well, why am I staying, right? Why have I been at Omnicom so long? It's because you all provided XYZ, right? So being able to share that in boardrooms and get executives to think about not just the numbers, right? They're measured on the numbers, but the stories are important.
To add to that point, what I said about the cultural insight, that's exactly what it is. The insight developed the great work, not the data.
The numbers,
that the analytics team did. So
I think one of the things that we're trying to do more of in this space of, now we're trying to be more proximate, trying to get more intentional at being in person. My leadership team wants to meet with, let's say, a group of small businesses. I am not a creator by trade, but as a creator, I am going to try to create a space where if there's an opportunity for my senior exec to hear from the community, well, the community better be well represented. And that's what really my DEI values are going to come in from a creating of the space. So trying to be intentional in, yes, I am meeting those folks, but are my execs also speaking to, people from the community, to Black and Brown SMBs, to, folks that might identify as women-owned small businesses? Like, is the room diverse and representative so that then my senior team can hear their stories? The Pat Bennett story that I brought up earlier, like our exec uses it all the time. Mm-hmm. And she, is a Black woman-owned business. She is more experienced. I'm not sure what her age is, but 40 plus. And she uses that all the time. And you know what? That is a good damn story, not because she's Black, but because she is a great business. And it just so happened that she was in the room and we were intentional about putting her in that room. And now her story gets to be amplified, right? So again, what is the output? The input is, how can I create those spaces? And the output is, how are we amplifying those stories? Because they're good stories. They're good stories. They're good for business. And the more that we can, I think, from the internal or a middle management perspective, create those spaces and be intentional, I think that helps with the DI and ingrain it really from a very foundational level, without it being so we're doing this DI story. No, this is just a damn good story. And this is, but it's coming from this woman. So how can we make that go mainstream? So that's kind of what I've been trying to do this past year or two, creating more of those spaces.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that, because that really is truly what inclusion is supposed to be, right? Is just making sure that we're intentional about the spaces we created. So phenomenal question. It is time for us to close. And I just want to thank you all so much for the rich nuggets you shared on this topic. And as we begin to close, I just have one final question. When you think about what's ahead, because when we have these conversations, that's really where we should be focused on what's next. So whether it's an emerging trend, an idea that you think needs more visibility, or something that you're really looking ahead to, please just share that with us on this theme of how we can bring more authenticity into how companies are connecting with communities. And I'll just tell you one that I'm taking directly from some of what you all shared is, how do we get more senior executives in the rooms with the actual communities that they're having an impact on so they can hear directly from them is something I'm taking away. Now I'd leave it to each of you to give us your final thought.
My final thought is I'd love for our teams to look exactly like the US population, right? To be so reflected that their lived experiences, their backgrounds, whether they have, a disability or an ability, is in the room already, so that by the time it hits the consumer, it feels so true and home and it touches more lives. That's what I'd like to see and what I work on every day.
I heard maybe Sid Wilson say this word at a panel, upculturate. And it's, in my 10 plus years at Google, the relationships that I've built, how can I upculturate myself? And then how can I also help my leaders and my team upculturate? Because I think that's why it's not, it's not about, catering to the mainstream, as we know, but it's about how can we be authentic and how can we upculturate ourselves to follow those trends, see what's novel, what's new, and bring that insight back so that we can really create programs that continue to be innovative and cutting edge.
For me, in my work, I want to go from shifting the perception of ads by partnering with creators to also shifting the perception of what it means to be a creator, just the connotations that come with a creator. They think they aren't necessarily a real business, but they are. They employ people. They do social impact, social good. So it's changing that narrative and demonstrating how creators are actually driving change in their local and global communities for me.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. This was an incredible conversation. I'm glad that C-Suite Coach was able to be a part of this. And thank you to Salon Culture Conversations for having us here in Cannes today. Thank you.
Thank you.